but just wanted to make sure that it's working the way that it should right now, and looks like it mostly is. So sorry about any of the technical hiccups here as I get going. One thing real quick before we go into today's Ask Me Anything live stream event, just wanted to apologize to everybody. I mean, there's so many questions that were asked last week, and it ended up being a pretty busy Ask Me Anything live stream, and there was just a lot of questions that were coming in, and towards the end I just couldn't get to anywhere near all the questions that people had. That's just going to happen sometimes. I'll try to be, if that does happen, I'm going to try to kind of skim down just to make sure I'm hitting questions. There's a lot of other commentary that tends to come up along the way. And so what happens is if I can't see the question, it just takes me a little while to actually find questions that somebody actually sends in to me. So just a real quick comment here. If you see my nose looks a little burned here, I did recently just summit Mount St. Helens here just the other day. And I went up there with my daughter, who's going away to the Air Force Academy actually this in about a month. So she wanted to go out. That asked her what she wanted to do before she left, and that was one of the things on her bucket list. She has a long bucket list, but that was one of them. So I just summited Mount St. Helens. I don't know why I've never summited Mount St. Helens before. I've done a lot of the other mountains in Washington. For whatever reason, I haven't done that one. So even though it's not that far away from my house. So that was a fun experience. But I'm getting a little old to be doing that as efficiently and as quickly as I used to do those types of hikes and climbs when I was younger. So, but it's still good to go out there and see the great Pacific Northwest and all the wonderful things that are out here. Plus, it was the 44th anniversary, or the day after the 44th anniversary of the eruption in 1980. So it was kind of fun just to go up there. I remember I was just a kid when it went off, but anyway, that was just it seems like so long ago, but I do remember people always ask, where were you doing when Mount St. Helens went off? And I remember our family was in church that day. And I remember my mom was concerned about our when the eruption happened. She was concerned about our well house that we had. Lived fairly rural at the time, but we had a kind of a house that was around our well, but it was kind of this cheesy place, and she was worried that it wasn't covered enough to protect the well from getting potential ash in the well. And so we rushed home and covered up the well house, even though most of the ash cloud actually went to eastern Washington and didn't get up to where we were living at the time. But that's kind of one of my only memories as a kid at that age about it. That and going down and seeing the big ash piles in different places of Washington that were they had to clear out of the road, or different spots, and finding pumice. I remember I remember finding that when I was a kid as well. So anyway, just a long time ago, and it was interesting to climb up there. If you go up there in the winter, like we did, there's snow basically the last thousands of feet, going up to the summit, and so there's a bit of a hike and a bit of a chore. I'm glad I've done a lot of climbing in the past. I haven't done that much lately, but it's a little bit easier to get through that kind of process as you come up on the fall summits, and you're just continuing to have to go up there. My daughter claims I was definitely the oldest guy on the mountain that day, and that's probably true. But anyway, so when you do that, you do as much as you can try to cover yourself up from being burned when you're up on snow or on glaciers. Inevitably, you still get a little bit more sun than you want, and so that's why I'm looking a little bit more weathered today than normal. Plus, to do that hike, you basically drive there to the snow park. And camp overnight, and of course, like everything else, everything's running late, so we didn't actually get there till like midnight the night before to do the hike. That's not a lot of time that you get to go up on a fairly arduous hike. Anyway, so it was kind of fun. Then going down to one other thing I'm going to talk about today. I referenced this in the live stream launch, is I want to talk a little bit about the Stop the Gas Ban initiative effort here right now that was just launched last week. It was launched after I did my last live stream. And there's some issues that are worth discussing about this, and kind of just state situation that kind of led to this kind of thing, and this is really more of a symptom of a problem than anything else. And I want to kind of discuss some of the issues that are involved in kind of the legislative effort by both our bureaucracy and the Democrats dominantly in the state. Occasionally they get help with Republicans, but generally it's been driven by the Democrats and some of the special interests just to increase the cost of living for all of us. And what those efforts tend to be in these little slices, kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, and the pushback with Initiative 2066 and what that means, I think it's going to be worth discussing here as well. And then, in fact, why don't I just do that real quick just so I get into this. I did do a video on this today, and I'll get into more details later on, but these are some of the signature sheets. You'll probably see them out there on, outside of stores and outside of other places. But this is an initiative to the people, not an initiative to the legislature. Why that matters is that the initiative to the people has a much shorter time frame. Same number of signatures that you need to collect, but you have to do it a lot quicker. So they essentially have to have all these signatures collected by the end of June, essentially 5 weeks from now. The turn-in date's actually July 5th, but to process it, I think they're going to be collecting signatures right up until the last minute, but they really have to get all those signatures in hand and good to go, most likely kind of right before that July 4th holiday. So there's a lot of effort that I imagine that are going to be, that the Let's Go Washington people, and there's other groups that are sponsoring this as well, Building Industry of Washington, realtors with the contractors, general contractors with Hospitality Association. I think there were a number of other groups that have come out and sponsored it. So there's a bunch of people that are trying to help get this initiative across. So that difference that I mentioned as far as the time frame is a big deal. It makes it logistically a lot more challenging to collect essentially 405,000 plus signatures. Statutory requirement is just under 325,000 legitimate signatures from registered voters in Washington State that aren't duplicates, that are unique and individual. But in order to be safe, they have to go and collect a lot more than that. So, and usually giving yourself an extra 80,000 plus signatures is a good idea. So I imagine that they'll be shooting for that 400 to 410,000 range. Still hard to do, even with the Let's Go Washington people who've clearly perfected to some extent the process of collecting signatures in Washington State, because they were successful with the 6 signatures that they got 6 initiatives simultaneously last year. We did a lot of videos about that. I interviewed Brian Haywood, the prime sponsor, on that last time. But the issue there is that it's a pretty big deal, and it's going to be the dominant story probably for about a month or so. If they get it turned in, of course, then it's going to remain and kind of roll forward. And what that happens is this initiative, if they get it, this is an initiative to the people. This will actually be the first initiative on the ballot. And essentially what this is to repeal the gas ban, the natural gas ban, and give people energy choices. Now, for clarity, this is really based on House Bill 1589. The video I'm launching on this later on today, I would have actually been launching it really quickly, but I was having trouble with the thumbnail. I just couldn't quite finish it before the live stream was scheduled here today. But the initiative would be added to the 3 initiatives that are already going to be on the ballot in November, and they'll be the first things on the ballots for everybody voter in Washington State. Those are the first 3 things you come across. Now, if this one passes, it means there will be 4 initiatives on the ballot. One to the people, which would be this stop the gas ban and natural gas ban, protect energy choice. You'd have the repeal of Inslee's carbon tax scam for increasing the cost of fuel. You'd have the repeal of the capital gains tax, which they claim is just for rich people, but the reality is the Democrats have already put multiple proposals in to reduce it so that it's no longer rich people that pay it, but pretty much everybody in Washington State who has, it's just typical, right? Typical with every tax they propose. And then the 4th one is to let people have the option to opt out of the long-term care scam tax that's coming out of your payroll check right now, every time you get a payroll check. So anyway, this is really, really interesting to see if they can pull this off. For those of you who support this, and I do, I think it's a great idea to repeal the stupid gas tax or the gas ban, the natural gas ban. And you're not alone. Any survey done on the subject shows somewhere between 70-80% of the population thinks it's a stupid idea that the legislature and Inslee signed, that the legislature passed and Inslee signed, and the special interests that are involved. But it's really kind of a sneakier, nasty little project more than what people realize. Increasing the cost of energy for the average person in Washington state isn't the result of just one piece of legislation that comes out of Olympia. It's really just this cumulative impact of various bills, one bill after another over the years. One bill, saying that dams, the hydropower is not a recurring or environmentally good power, right? So therefore, it allows them to, it doesn't, it increases the cost of what you actually pay on your utility rates. All these other little things that they start to do over time build up and increase the cost of living. It's just what it does. The federal government does this all the time. State governments do this all the time. Your cities do it all the time. And they impact all kinds of things. I mean, we've been talking about energy, and it is impossible to live in a modern society with, at least to live well, without low-cost energy. So whatever you can do to find a way to provide power and energy to people in the lowest and most reliable way you possibly can, to the lowest cost, most reliable way you can, all the better. The lower cost, the more reliable that energy is, the better living is going to be in that community. And that's just for the average person. It reduces their overall cost of living. Same with food. If you are able to reduce the cost of food, or at least reduce the friction of the cost of delivering food to the consumer, then the consumer is able to ultimately pay less for their food. If you find ways of making farming difficult, impossible, regulated out of existence, forced into the point where they can't grow those crops here, they have to grow them in China and import them, which means that the quality is lower and you have no control over what's happening with that food. Whatever it is that the regulatory environment introduces, it does nothing but create friction and costs, and simply increases the cost that you and I pay. It's bad enough to have inflationary impact and an incompetent monetary policy that simply floods the world with dollars and massive deficits and huge debt that ultimately destroys the value of your currency, which is a terrible inflation tax that happens to everybody. But then you have ridiculous policies like these that end up cutting, down on the cost, increasing the cost of living for everybody, and it cuts down your ability to live your life. I mean, it just hurts everybody, and it particularly hurts the lowest income people. Even if they do kickback schemes and small rebates to so-called low-income people, it doesn't make up for the fact that they're substantially increasing their cost of living. The other thing I want to point out, I mentioned this quite a bit, and I do talk about this in my video that I'm launching, but in order to get something like 1589 across, one of the things they needed to do is they needed to inspire Puget Sound Energy, who is the largest private utility in Washington providing power and natural gas. And it's about 1.2 million customers roughly, maybe a little more than that, but it's mostly concentrated in the Puget Sound area. And it's owned by Canadians. Before that, it was owned by Australians. It hasn't been owned by people who lived in America for a long time. But anyway, this utility, obviously they don't want to increase their cost of doing business because that impacts their ability to have profit, and they are a for-profit entity in a monopoly situation. And they're controlled, theoretically, by the Utility and Transportation Commission, which basically is the entity that supervises and has to approve any rate increases that are given by Puget Sound Energy, for example. And so Puget Sound Energy would normally be opposed to something like this. So they know this, they being the government officials. And so what they have to do in order to pass a stupid bill like making it ultimately laying the groundwork to make natural gas impossible to get in the future. Remember, this bill doesn't totally ban natural gas, it just sets the stage to ban it soon. And so, and without the foundation that this bill would represent, their future bill that would ban natural gas outright is a lot harder to implement. So they have to get Puget Sound Energy out of the way. And to get Puget Sound Energy out of the way, what you have to do is you have to bribe them. And one of the best ways to bribe them is simply just make it a heck of a lot easier for them to raise rates and to raise utility rates on everybody, whether you get natural gas or not. And that's what this bill did, 1589, just simply exempting. It really is more like a get-out-of-jail-free card to Puget Sound Energy. It's a giveaway to them to say, listen, you can jack your rates up so that all these, your million-plus people who are required to buy energy from you, your utility monopolistic position, rather than having this control over you, on theoretical control that the Utilities and Transportation Commission represents, we're going to basically give you a get-out-of-jail-free card, jack those rates up as high as you want, and the UTC is going to give you a pass. And that's what it is. That's the bribe. Puget Sound Energy took the bribe, and so they're not going to oppose 1589. And that's how the Democrats believe that they can pass stupid bills like this, is buying off these special constituencies. And that's what they did in this case. And obviously, it's annoyed and frustrated a lot of people, which is why this initiative was launched. The reason why they launched it as late as they did is that they also had a ballot title challenge window to go through. And so they launched it last week. I think after I did my last video last week, it was launched officially. And what they were waiting for was that ballot title challenge to go through. So anyway, you're going to see this out there. It's a big deal. I did a video on it. And if it wasn't for my own incompetence and putting up the thumbnail, putting it together, I would already be launching it right now. But I'll try to launch it this evening if I can, or worst case scenario, tomorrow morning. The other thing I was going to mention is I was the MC at the Pacific County Republicans. And on Saturday, they had a function out there, their Lincoln Day dinner. It was a little bit of a smaller function. They hadn't had one. COVID kind of shot down their Lincoln Day dinners for a while, and so this is them kind of getting back on their feet, and they had this Lincoln Day dinner, and I was their MC a little bit for it. It wasn't as much focused on fundraising as it was just kind of introducing the candidates. And at the end of that meeting, while I was still inside talking to people, as oftentimes happens at events like this, one of the people who was there, a lady, was actually walking down the stairs in front of the event and fell down and hurt herself. And, it was a head cut and needed to be taken to the hospital right away. Fortunately, the hospital clinic was just a couple of blocks away, but it required Joe Kent, who's a candidate for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, which is also where I live, and who was endorsed by the Republicans for the 3rd Congressional District. He was there, and he had to jump in and help her. Some other people had jump in and help her. It was kind of scary, a lot of blood, when something like that happens, and they're rushing her off to the hospital. But it does help remind us, you got to remember that there's these real things in life that become quite traumatic and important to remember around you, whether that's somebody falling down the stairs and really getting hurt. More important than anything else going on, you got to jump in and help them and make sure they get the the medical care they need right away. It's an emergency. And I also felt like being on top of Mount St. Helens yesterday with my daughter was another good reminder of sometimes the important things that you focus on. It's always possible for the political process to inflict a tremendous amount of damage and harm to us, and they certainly are doing their best to make life as miserable and difficult for people moving forward, the average person. I know the politicians are doing a good job to pay off political insiders and special interests, and they're doing a terrible job representing the rest of us at the state, local, and federal level in particular. But it's still important to remember at the end of the day, the people that you have around you, your friends and family, your neighbors, those are the people that really matter the most. And I think not forgetting that, losing sight of that, I think is important. So anyway, that's what I was, it was on my mind when I got started this event here. So let's jump into some of the questions we have here. As a reminder, try to say @WeTheGovern just so that you can kind of see that little orange question there. It's easier for me to spot that and all these questions and comments that start popping up. It's easier for me to spot the question. Last time I had a hard time getting to that. And also, I don't want to forget, I will be talking about, at some point here, the Tales of Tyranny series of stories that I'm going to be doing on Bob Ferguson and his just endless legacy of destroying people's lives for his own personal benefit. Okay, let's talk about this first question here from Odie4Wam. What's the best way to get politicians to listen at things like council meetings? How impactful are public comments? Is it better to be ornery or docile, collaborative versus combative? Well, okay, this is a good question. And this is something I remember working with 14 years ago when I was helping people do public comment and trying to give them a basic way of making their public comments efficiently. There's a couple of things that I would definitely recommend. If you are not a very knowledgeable, skilled public speaker who's used to going in front of an audience and speaking without notes because you can keep those things organized in your head, please just type up what you're going to say in some way, even if it's just some comments or some notes. If you're going to do that, make it really big font so it's easy for you to see when you're up there at the microphone, because a lot of people get nervous. It's very common. That's how most people are. It allows you to stay on track. Usually you only have 3 minutes. I know there's some local cities that'll let you have 5 minutes, but mostly it's 3 minutes or so when you're doing public comment. I think it depends on your subject that you're speaking about. Humor, I think, is impactful at times if used correctly. calling people names is not a useful exercise if you're going to make public comment. I think that at council meetings, so I'm assuming you're talking about like city council or county commission meetings, things like that. It's important to just keep bringing up and staying focused. You can't give your laundry list of all your concerns in 1 3-minute comment, but you can probably get across maybe 3 points, but usually it's better if you just have one. I'm primarily concerned about the comp plan that the city's putting in because it's going to destroy the ability of anybody to ever afford a house here again, that kind of thing. Or I'm primarily concerned about the homeless grant grifting operation where the so-called nonprofits making millions of dollars, and the problem just keeps getting worse. Your grant money is like fertilizer for drug addicts in the community, and maybe we should look at something different, whatever it is. I think that you want to stay focused on the topic, and combative versus collaborative just depends on the nature of your politicians. If you have some that in the community that actually have a genuine heart for solving problems in the community, I think collaborative is a better approach to take. Never be docile, which is one of the questions that you had here about asking about docile. Ornery is okay if it's done well. Again, name calling's not a good use of the time. And I don't think you want to be the person that is crazy at the microphone, because then nobody is going to want to work with you anyway. So I just don't think that's the kind of thing that you're going to want to have. I hope that helps. Just a real quick pointer here. If you use like 22-point font, so larger font, usually you could have about a 3-minute comment done on 3 pages of paper with just normal spacing in it. And so if you're really nervous, it gives you something to read. And I would always encourage you looking up. You want to make eye contact, but at least it gives you something that you've thought about, and it's usually written down in a way that it makes it a little bit more efficient when you're making that presentation. Roy Pulver, is anyone in Clark County on Ivan Rakelin's hit list? I don't even know whose that is, so can't answer that question. I don't know. Let's see, John Jacobs' son. I would like to know if the 3 Bob situation is real or a hoax. If it is real, Fergie has no right to order a reorganization of the ballot. What a crybaby. Well, it was real. I mean, that you had 2 other people in Washington State named Bob Ferguson who wanted to run for governor, and that was the great crime that they were charged with prison for committing. I don't think one of the things that Ferguson did during that press conference is explicitly illegal. Was that he basically used his public office to try to force the Secretary of State to change the order of the people on the ballot, because he got chosen as lucky number 13 and he wanted to be moved up ahead of the other Bob Fergusons to number 2, or he wanted to move them down below him. Either of those issues, if the Secretary of State to make that change, that is completely illegal for the Secretary of State to do that. The Secretary of State could do something like, and the statute, it's not really a statute, it's a whack, but it's an administrative code that could allow them to do something where they could put in like, a retired state worker or, retired veteran or something like that to distinguish them from the attorney that's running, the Attorney General Bob Ferguson. But he had a complete meltdown, went crazy, and I think you saw somewhat his true face. The inner tyrant will come out if you give them an option to do so, and that definitely happened for him in that press conference. There's another question here. Glenn, I just wanted that you know that I felt proud of myself playing the piano during last week's recital. I'd finally faced my fears. Well, that's great, Thunderstriker 303. Very happy for you. Glad you were able to do that. There's Randy, this is a good question. What law did the other Bob Ferguson supposedly break? I looked around, couldn't find any specifics. It is hard to find the statute. It's under RCW, 29A84. And there's a lot of things in there that are archaic and left over from other times and don't mean what Ferguson's presenting them to mean, but that's where it was, and that's what they said that they had violated, and it was he was nasty, so that's how it is. Let's see, 2066 is the name of the initiative. So that's a good question. As you see right here, these are assigned by these initiative numbers here get assigned as they're applied. I mean, the people who are applying for these initiatives don't get to pick their own numbers, so they get assigned by, I'm trying to remember if that's the Secretary of State or the I think it's the Secretary of State that assigns those. So once you have it, that's the one you have. So 2066 is when is the number on this particular initiative. And it's not about the signature numbers. There's another comment here. I'll post this comment up here actually because this is somebody who's probably involved in the initiative process. So yeah, you can return the signed sheets by mail or pickup. No later than June 26th for the drop-off, and July 3rd is kind of that would be kind of the latest times. I mean, here's the thing, having seen a little bit behind the scenes of what goes into doing these initiative processes, the counting and the processing on the back end isn't instantaneous. They have to scan them, they have to make sure there's no duplicates. There's a lot of their own work that they have to do just to double check everything when they go to submit these in because they're trying to do their own count back here, right? They're trying to do their own count in the back to make sure that when they submit them to the Secretary of State's office, that they're already over the top. You don't just trust the Secretary of State to do the right thing. You don't. Just like you shouldn't trust government to do the right thing at any given time. But especially with something like that, you cannot trust them to do the right thing. So you want to have your own scan sheets, your ability to run it, cross-reference it with the voter rolls to the best you can so you know that you've got enough signatures when you go to turn them in. So he's right about the time frame roughly. I think the 26th, it says the 28th actually at the bottom of the signature sheets here that they're handing out, but the 26th is good if you're going to send them back by mail. I think they said that a lot of people were requesting when I contacted the Let's Go Washington people about this initiative project. They mentioned that they were just getting overwhelmed with people requesting the sheets to be mailed to them so that they could fill them out and send them back in, which is great. You just got to remember to do it. Having been around these initiative processes now a little bit in the last couple of years, I've been told and seen that all these initiative sheets that come in like after the deadline's passed. Now, you can stay on top of that a little bit easier on an initiative to the legislature that lasts all the way through the end of the year. But if you're trying to repeal something same year, you have to do initiative to the people, or you want to pass something like this that's going to have an impact this year. You have to get on this ballot in November. You have to do it that same year, and so it's a much tighter time frame, a lot more challenge involved in the logistics of doing it, and so these time frames really matter. Plus, the post office is falling apart at the seams. I wouldn't trust the post office to get stuff there. So if you can do a handoff, that's great. Or get in the mail earlier, as soon as possible. If you get one of these mailed to you because you've requested it, I would get it filled out like that weekend and get the whole sheet done, and then I would drop in the mail right away so it's getting in pretty quick. So I wouldn't kick it down the road. Alex Brown, you got a question here. Have you seen the rise in scam calls lately? And the answer to that is yes, by the way. I've seen quite a bit more going on than in the past. It seems to be this exploding issue. There's one currently affecting BECU members where refund scammers are spoofing BECU's actual number and making it through spam filters. Well, that's not a good thing, and hopefully people are getting aware of that. Unfortunately, if you've ever been around somebody like an elderly person in your life, and in particular, but it doesn't require somebody to be elderly, who falls for one of these scams, it's a pretty devastating thing because, they just get, these scam artists are very good at what they do. Oftentimes they're not even in America, but they find some way of getting into the phone system and a scam that's believable for some percentage of the people. Remember, they don't have to be that believable. There's a famous YouTube video of somebody, it was a TED Talks if I remember right, and he had set up this business where he would try to get scams, and he would talk to them on the phone and make them go away, or do just different funny things. It's funny to think about that, but basically for every person that does, they know that 1,000 people aren't going to listen to the Nigerian fraud scam story. But there's always somebody in that group, and they're working on numbers. They just simply have to find it. So they automate these kind of pushes, and then they find some way of getting money from those people. And I know of people who've had family members, usually older, who fall for these scams, and it's unbelievable when they do, but they do. And I know that, Alex, that's probably a good public service announcement there, that it certainly is worth making sure that you don't fall for these if you can. Let's see. This is interesting. Oh, thank you. This is a good question. I've thought about. So here's a question here from Mr. Fixie. Would you subscribe to the idea that we should demand the right to use cash? I think this is a major issue. Control the currency, control the people. And the answer to that is yes. I actually think that this is kind of a big deal. We've seen some stories about this in the past, and one of the issues is there has been a tendency, especially since COVID, to kind of try to shift away from cash. There's been a war on cash in America for sure, all over the country, and it's gone on again, off again over the years. During COVID, it was this big argument that for some reason they were out of change or something like that. If you remember that, they would say they didn't have any change in the stores. And by the way, that things like that have actually popped up in the history of America. It was a big problem back in the early 1800s, so they didn't have small currency like 1 cent pennies, for example. And so it was hard to make change at smaller denominations. Or you had problems in the 60s where they felt that they were having a problem, 1960s, where they were having a problem distributing coins adequately enough to come back to the people who actually had the ability to make change. And generally, over time, we haven't seen that as much in modern times, but the modern push now has been to go all electronic if they can. And part of it is about control and lack of privacy and ultimately trying to get to some kind of CBT, basically electronic controls of your currency. And you really don't want that, because if you get there, they can decide to control and restrict where and how you can spend your money and how much you can spend, or monitor it and then throttle your money back, or freeze your account instantly with no ability to do anything on your part. You would just one minute you would lose control and access to all the money that you have. And you wouldn't have the ability to do anything at all. I think the right to use cash is a very important thing to have. The other thing to remember is that when Sweden recently, and they're the country that actually I think is the most electronic in their personal currency distribution, they've had problems now, and they've discovered that it creates a lot of issues for them. For instance, when you have a power failure, there's no effective way to do any kind of currency exchange at all. Everything just essentially shuts down. At least if you have the option to have some cash out there so that you can still have financial transaction in times when power's out or power's spotty, or there's something wrong with the computer somewhere, whatever it is. And especially in this era of like AI and hacking and cyber attacks and kind of the modern warfare kind of situation, you really want to have that option. And I think destroying that option or taking it away is ridiculous. It really leads us down a bad road, and I'm completely in favor of the right to be able to use cash for any transaction. It protects your currency and it strengthens it. It doesn't weaken it, and it reduces the amount of abuse of control and Big Brother type invasion that can happen. But there's nothing wrong with reducing that. So I like the idea of pushing for the right to use cash, and I think that's a really, really important thing. I signed the natural gas petition yesterday. Thank you. I don't know where you're from, but that's good to hear. I've heard that it went out pretty far and wide. I haven't seen any at the stores myself. I do have a couple sheets here that I had picked up, but I got a feeling it's hitting the ground pretty hard and far and wide. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, don't presume that just because they were successful last year that this is instantly going to be successful. You have to do work. You can't just presume it's going to happen on its own. It does take energy and time to get out there and get this kind of stuff out and to be successful at it. It's not as simple as people think. So Windsurfer, okay, there's somebody mentioning that they had signed the petition in Spokane to stop the natural gas ban. And keep in mind, I want to clarify, because I know the opponents of this initiative, the people who want to ultimately repeal natural gas, they're out there saying, oh, this doesn't ban natural gas. And it doesn't initially. It doesn't completely ban natural gas. It sets the foundation so that they can ban it. And particularly what was nasty, I think, on this was bribing Puget Sound Energy with this basically unlimited ability to increase rates in exchange for, it has to do partly with how they're writing off their natural gas infrastructure. And so that suddenly increased the cost to Puget Sound Energy. So to make up for that cost, they're going to allow them to just jack up their rates to everybody, whether you get natural gas or not. That's a nasty, just deceptive, corrupt piece of legislation that was pushed under the guise of climate change, another climate change scam. And it's really just all about jacking up the cost of power where you live and power energy. It's absurd. It's a terrible idea. And it's all about increasing the cost of living for every regular person. So I'm glad that they're doing this initiative. It is super popular. And anyway, that's a pretty big deal. And Sydney, okay, thank you. Yep, get them out there. But I mean, time is of the essence. So I'd be collecting those signatures as fast as you can. It's a 5-week push at this point in time. So if you like this initiative as I do, you're going to want to push pretty hard and fast. Here's a question from Brendan Rudak. Do you have specific concerns about Cooterer running for state insurance commissioner? Well, sure, because she's a clown. We have to stop electing just the most clownish, horrible people that we can find in government, the most corrupt and dishonest people, and then sticking them in these significant positions. Insurance commissioner sounds like a boring position, and it's a state position that we have. And you know, anybody who's ever had to pay for their car bills, their car insurance lately, you know that those rates have increased 25% plus just in 1 year. And essentially what's happening is because of, and it's not 100% because of the insurance commissioner or something like that would happen, but that has a big impact on their ability to, for instance, open Washington to more insurance companies, which would be wise if we want to keep the price of insurance low, but they aren't doing that. And instead, the tendency of the Insurance Commission has been to make things more expensive and more difficult for the average consumer to be able to get any kind of high quality insurance product here. And Cooterer will just be more of the same, probably worse. Kreidler, as corrupt and dishonest as he was, at least he had mostly dementia over the last 6 years. So, you know, it was staff run and it was just kind of slip-sliding away. Cooterer is going to be an activist, sort of nasty person getting in there, just helping destroy one more state agency in some more significant way than it was before. So anyway, that's the problem I see there with her. So now the question here from T: how do you get a civil rights attorney for discrimination against physical disabilities? The Washington Bar Association did not help, and the nonprofits here are useless. Thanks. Well, I don't know where here is. But generally, if you have a pretty clear case of discrimination against physical disabilities specifically, but just any kind of discrimination, there's usually a list of 50 to 100 attorneys. So if your case has any merit, forget the Bar Association. I'm not sure how they would refer somebody to you. I mean, they supposedly have a list there, but I would start making phone calls for people who deal with those types of claims. You'll find a bunch in your phone, literally in the phone listing. Attorneys are a dime a dozen. There's a lot of them out there. It's hard to find a good attorney, that I admit, and it's even harder to find a good attorney who specializes in the specific type of law that you're looking for. But if you're looking for this type of attorney, you're going to want to go to a law firm or attorneys that specialize, and they do specialize in this exact specific type of problem. Because if you don't, if you just hire, if you go and you hire an attorney that specializes in estate law, they will not do you any good in dealing with a discrimination against physical disabilities case. So you're just gonna have to start making phone calls and finding somebody and laying out your case. It will not happen instantly. It's gonna take some time. They aren't running to your door trying to beat on it. Even though there's a ton of attorneys, it is what it is. What, if anything, is, okay, Sanera Frankenstein, what, if anything, is Tim Eyman involved in politically these days, or has Bob Ferguson permanently silenced him? Well, I mean, obviously, Tim Eyman was kind of the poster child of, lawfare from the AG's office against political activists. And it was completely egregious and over the top. And I mean, one of the challenges I think that Tim had, right, is he was a showman in a lot of ways, right, promoting his initiatives, and a lot of them succeeded. It is impossible for people to not recognize the lifetime significance of the cumulative total number of initiatives that Eyman was able to get across the finish line, which ultimately resulted in a reduction in the cost of living for you and I. It's estimated roughly that with the initiatives that he passed and was involved in over those years, that he reduced the cost of taxes to you and I by over $45 billion total. That's over $45 billion. By doing that, of course, you're defunding the administrative state and all of the grifting operations that prey on it. And so because of that, Eyman made himself enemy number one in just the bureaucratic kind of deep state system that we have in our state. Anybody who's successful is going to do that. And so they found a way to go after him. Ferguson decided to weaponize, more than any attorney general in the history of the state ever had, decided to weaponize the campaign finance laws that way. And actually, some aspects of what he went after Tim on have actually been changed after they passed the 2018 Stop Glen Morgan bill in the legislature. But that was only after I had gone out and started exposing all of these problems as it related to the fact that selective enforcement by Bob Ferguson was part of the issue. Plus, it's a little more complicated than that. I have to get into a lot of details to describe that whole story, give it any credence. But basically, you had Bob Ferguson selectively weaponizing the campaign finance laws, first against Tim Eyman, and then he went after Kim Wyman, and then he was selectively going after Republicans, and only Republicans during this period of time. And what happened is there was something called citizen action notice process, which has essentially been eliminated from the bill after the 2018 Stop Glen Morgan bill was passed. But it was only because I had filed tons of citizen action notice cases myself, and Ferguson was forced to file 19 lawsuits against his friends, or at least nominal political allies, which he didn't want to do, but he was doing it as a defensive tool to keep me from filing lawsuits against them. And then I filed another 30 cases or so against the ones he refused to prosecute, plus some of his attorneys were leaving and quitting, or he was firing them. It was kind of a chaotic moment there. And so they decided to get rid of the citizen action notice process, and essentially is what they did, which was fine. I think it was being abused. And also, it caused his office then to stop being involved so much in the campaign finance world, which is where he was hoping to make his reputation in destroying all of his Republican opponents that way. So he really did get Tim Eyman nailed substantially here in a completely unfair and over-the-top and egregious level of prosecution. Most of the time when somebody violates campaign finance laws in the state, and every time that they violate it if they're a Democrat, they generally just, you find out what the problem is and then you pay a fine. And the fine's usually relatively nominal. I know this because you can look at my website and I've caught hundreds. I think I'm almost up to 300 now total of confirmed violations, people who definitely broke the law, and there were fines involved in some of those cases, or warning letters, something like that. But there's no doubt they broke the law, and I caught them breaking the law, no different than Tim Eyman was caught breaking the law by Bob Ferguson. But of course, in Tim Eyman's case, it's a $5.2 million judgment that's non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, right? I mean, it's just, that is the game, and that's what Ferguson did. Ferguson is an evil man. He's abusive. All he does is he's used his position in government at every opportunity to abuse people that he believes he can beat up on. He targets political enemies. He targets cash piles if he thinks he can snag it and use it for his own purposes. He's weaponized the agency in a way that is probably in a substantial violation of all ethics laws and any rules as regards campaign finance, because he's misusing public resources to promote his campaign. The tuna chicken check scam is part of that. So that's what he's been doing. Anyway, so that's what they're doing. What do you think about putting, so Tim Eyman, by the way, is still involved, I think, as a citizen, but it's difficult for him to make the same kind of impact when you're bankrupted and destroyed and you've got a $5.2 million judgment over your head. Oh, and by the way, I mean, Ferguson, of course, weaponized the agency to harass his family, to harass all his donors and supporters and neighbors and friends and dogs and whatever he could. It was, there's never been a history of prosecution by the Attorney General's office in its history, not one, that ever dedicated the amount of resources that they did to go after Tim Eyman in this case. It's completely egregious and over the top. And it's a good example of prosecutorial misconduct. And Ferguson should be hung around his neck, but you got to remember his friends, his political allies that he needs their campaign contributions, they like it. So he's done it to help them and to help the people who felt like they missed it out on their grant grifting schemes by the reduction in the taxes. So that's it. What do you think about putting pressure on our hopefully Republican governor to really use the veto power? Well, obviously, if you have a Republican governor in there, I would anticipate that, especially if you still have a Democratic legislature, which is statistically, the Democrats are likely to still be in control. They may lose a number of seats, I think, in the state house and even the Senate this cycle, and I kind of do expect that to happen. But you're still going to most likely still have a Democrat legislature in control on both sides. The control might be less, but it still may be there. You have to be willing and able to use that veto power. It's super important. And depending on how many Republicans are in there, it'll to some extent greatly substantially reduce insanity coming out of the state legislature. More importantly than the veto power, though, is the ability to fire. And you're going to need the ability to fire and downsize a lot of these state agencies that are essentially out of control. you're also going to want to use the power of the governor to go in and do mass auditing of just a lot of contracts and kickback schemes and grifting operations through the grant process. There's a lot of genuine problems in a one-party ruled state for so many years in the executive office. So the veto power is one thing, but there's more to it than just that. Let's see, Jason, hey, heard you were, hope you're doing well. Heard you on the Todd Herman show, really interesting. Did Sideshow Bob use the Consumer Protection Act against the florist? I'm trying to remember if that was a Consumer Protection Act case. I should remember that, but I don't. I'll have to look it back up. But, you know, he's just looking for any excuses, so I think he finds them all over the place. So, good afternoon, Glenn. I'm running for U.S. Congress. This is by Orion Webster. Orion Webster, I guess, for the 1st District. What advice would you give for the federal government to support our state? Okay, good question. One thing, I always think that the federal government, if they could do anything, it would be to just get out of our way and leave us alone. And so whatever we can do to make it so that the feds aren't controlling and micromanaging every aspect of our life, unusually so. In some cases in Washington, they do some things where they are helping us. For example, in the dams, where Governor Inslee, in an insane policy push, is thinking about just making life even more difficult for people by trying to take out the Snake River dams, or at least setting the stage to potentially do that, which is insane. It is truly self-destructively, self-immolating insanity right there by itself. But the feds, to some extent, have some control over that, and so there's some restriction on that potentially happening. One of the things I would do is I would consider looking at the distribution of land that is owned by the federal government inside these states, and not parks, not federal parks, but things like BLM land and U.S. Forest Service land, and seeing if there's a way that ownership of that land could be transferred to local control in the states. I think even as bad as Washington State is, and it's bad, Washington State could still probably manage some of those federal lands better than the federal government would. And I think that's even more true when you see states like Utah and Montana and the Dakotas, these other places where the feds own a substantial amount of the land there. And finding ways to get the federal government out of the land ownership process is a good thing. Again, federal parks at this point in time, especially when you look at surveys, I would treat that very separately, but I think that that's one step that you could go down and grind away at. I think also encouraging lower tax rates would be better, and then anything you can do just to pull the abusive, invasive, sort of nasty nature of government entities in the state. And federal, this double layer process where the state and the feds essentially have the same agency and each of them play off each other to abuse the people who live here. There's a lot of work that could be done to do some of that research. Good luck running for Congress. That's a tough race to do, and that district is tough. Zaire, I'm assuming, is the name here. Why does it seem like all the policy being passed by both sides of the aisle is detrimental to the people of the country? Am I somehow seeing things incorrectly? No, you're not, actually, especially at the federal level. The part of the problem here is that I just don't think ever, at the end of the day, very many people in D.C. or anywhere else in this country are caring about the direct impact by at least the dominant majority that exists there. I'm sure there's individuals that clearly do, but the dominant majority that exists there, they don't care about the damage they do to you and I. They're involved and surrounded by lobbyists that are pushing them, and special interests that are pushing them in certain directions and are selling them on all kinds of schemes and dreams that make them think that ultimately government's the answer, when most of the time it's not. It's the answer to making things worse, not making it better. And so they can't help themselves. They seem to just want to always go down that direction. The other problem is you have these omnibus 1,500-page bills that come in at the last minute. You have 48 hours to review it entirely before you vote on it. And they buy off different politicians, and this is at the federal level, but they do this to some extent at the state level. It's a little bit less obvious, but still the same issue. And they basically there's no way for you to read that. And so the whole thing's filled with pork and scams and kickback schemes and unintended consequences and special little buy-offs for each individual as it goes down. I would definitely find some way of making it impossible to pass bills beyond a certain length. And also coming up with a formula that you can't even propose, you can't vote on the bill until after it's been in front of the legislators long enough for them to have completely read it and digested the contents. It is absurd and ridiculous, the approach. It's embarrassing. No sane person with any level of intelligence would think that there's anything good that comes out of that type of passage of these omnibus scam bills. It just doesn't make sense. So anyway, so I think that's one of the problems. And yes, if you could preface it with @We the Governed, it just helps me spot that question easier. Hey, here's a rural carrier at the post office. What's killing us is 40-year-old trucks that break down and some catching fire, getting robbed, shot, and Amazon packages. This is actually a great question, and I'm glad. If you're a postal worker, I'm glad. I have had so many whistleblowers come to me from the post office talking about all kinds of problems there, and I've had to trigger postmaster inspector generals at the Seattle Distribution Center investigations when they've essentially stolen, and it's the workers at the post office that did this, at the distribution center, not the carriers, but it was actually the postal distribution center, where they basically take Republican mailers and then hide them or don't mail them out until after the election's done. And usually the result of the investigation is, well, we know it happened, it shouldn't have happened, but it did happen, right? The other problem has been an abusive work environment. It appears in some of these distribution centers where either for whatever reason they're not getting enough workers there, and they're forcing people to do double shifts, and apparently they could do that and make them do stuff that they're not, especially if somebody has a kid they need to pick up from school, they're not training them the same way. I've been told a number of times a while ago when the whole Cleveland post office quit, the whole staff, and they had to bring in people from out of town. Just as there's a lot of churn and problems in the post office. And it doesn't mean that as a carrier, especially a rural carrier, that you're not working hard. I know you are. I mean, anybody that has a postal carrier they've gotten to know because they're coming up to their house, they get to know this. But there are a number of problems in the post office that are greatly reducing the confidence that most of us would have in the post office's overall organization. Not a critique of you necessarily as a carrier yourself, but the overall organization and being able to deliver on what they're trying to do. Janine from Washington State, do you think Inslee will push for a 15-minute city here in Western Washington? Well, he already has. I mean, several of the cities in Washington have kind of taken this approach just by default. I mean, they changed the name because central planning schemes essentially aspire to the same thing and always have. The names just change all the time. It's this utopian kind of push for a city that'll never exist, and basing it on an idealized model, like a village model that used to exist long ago. There's actually I remember reading a story about the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks having this huge debate in the early 1900s. It was shortly after, or it might have been the late 1800s, but they were arguing about this idealized city, and the Mensheviks in particular, and they lost the Bolsheviks, and I'm sure most of them were killed later, because that's what always happens in the revolution. They kill off their allies first. But they were really focused on this idealized sort of city, and it was a big thing in socialist central planning circles to design the city so that it was very similar to what we call the 15-minute city here today. And it was all about control. It was about being able to control the people so that they're limited in their ability to be not controlled or surveilled or supervised. And so they always try to sell it on some kind of, Agenda 21, or I have a dream scheme associated with whatever that central planner's idea at the time is. And anyway, it happens a lot. It's the same Growth Management Act in Washington State was modeled, or at least allowed the foundation for that kind of a model to come in place, and it's not very good. How can we promote financial inclusion and access to banking services for marginalized communities? Well, one of the ways you do that is you do allow them to use cash. It's kind of ridiculous not to. So that is number one. I don't think the CBTC idea of this digital currency is good at all. How can you prevent the misuse of currency for illicit activities such as tax evasion and corruption? You can't. You can't totally eliminate that. You can usually catch it and find it over time, but just because, this is kind of a freedom and an argument about freedom and safety, right? If you can't have a perfect situation where you get absolutely everything, because there's no such thing as a totally safe society. There is not. Anybody that promises that is usually trying to push their totalitarian vision of the world, which means it's safe for them, just not for you. And the reality is, if you're going to have liberty, there's going to be some misuse of currency. People are going to buy stuff that's illegal sometimes. People are going to probably try to implement tax evasion in some ways. Now, you can avoid that if you simply make taxes a lot more simple, a lot lower, and easier to comply with. You can avoid a lot of the tax evasion problems. The corruption is going to be a totally different approach, because you will still get corruption no matter what you do, even if it's just whether you have cash or whether you have CBTC. Corruption is just simply going to become more sophisticated in a different way. You can buy off politicians or special interests by doing different things, and there's all kinds of ways to do that. They don't always have to have cash, but I don't think that's a good reason to not allow it. And this is a good follow-up on that. I can't believe we just got to this, the right to use cash discussion on this one, but that's what it is. Michael Curran, question, homeowner associations, just how legitimate are they? I hear rumors about mine and now hearing stuff about others. What's your opinion? Well, a lot of homeowner associations can be very abusive in how they're set up. People create homeowner associations, or they generally want to be in an entity like that because they don't want the Clampetts living next door who have 15 cars in the front yard and noisy animals in the backyard, right? That's generally kind of the theoretical model. You're worried that your property value is going to be impacted by the externality of having somebody like our farm when I was a kid, we had all these animals running around. You don't want that next door, right? So the theory is you have these homeowner association because everybody wants the same house or same basic layout, and they want to make sure that everybody has kind of the same agreement that if you're going to live here in this community, these are the basic rules you need to operate under. And I think that's fine if you have the voluntary agreement that that's where you want to live, and and I've lived in a homeowner association, controlled community before, but it was the one that I was in had very minimal restrictions. It wasn't an abusive one, but these homeowner associations are filled with, oftentimes they get crazy people involved and they try to do anything and everything they can to control others. I mean, the nature of man being what it is, the worst humans in your community are going to be the ones who want to be on your homeowner association board because they usually want to get in there to abuse a neighbor they don't like. That's why they get on. Or if they have more benign reasons, they're going on to protect themselves from the neighbor so they aren't getting destroyed. And so you create these little mini fiefdoms where there's no effective supervision and they can just do abusive things. And there's that is the biggest challenge with the homeowner association. So you get these stories of them saying you can't hang an American flag out in your front yard, or in our association we're not going to have campaign signs here, or we don't let you put a flag in your window, or your home can't be painted. They'll have all kinds of crazy things that happen. And so stories of abuse by homeowner associations are just unlimited. And they tend to create factions, just like you do anywhere else. And so you have one faction get in, and they'll be abusing these people. And then the other faction will come in, and then they'll abuse the other people. And so it's just a disaster when I see that stuff happening out there. Anyway, so that's where it goes. Best response ever. I'm writing that down. Glad you liked it. I don't know which response that was, but I'm glad that it was helpful. There's so many other questions here, guys. Let me just see if I can jump down. Sydney, at We the People, so it should be We the Govern for me to see that easily, but I still caught your question. Can you address net zero cities? Well, I mean, all these things are scams. They're designed to increase the cost of living for you and I. It creates a utopian environment where supposedly political elite in some way or bureaucratic elite have control of you in every way. Net zero cities, it's just another search for utopia that'll never happen. They'll fail just like everything else does. So you have to be aware that any of these fancy names, they keep changing the names all the time, but essentially they come back the same thing. And anyway, it's just the way it is. So how do we, sorry, I missed this earlier, Dash. How do we not repeat them stealing again like in 2020? I'm assuming you mean elections. Enlighten me. Well, number one, getting more involved and paying attention to what's actually going on. I do think a lot of bad behavior that occurs in elections is happening because nobody's watching or engaged. I don't think that's the case anymore. When I was trying to work on voter roll cleanup ahead, this is before the 2019 election, or the 2020 election. So in 2019, when I was trying, even earlier, back when I was trying to do this in 2011 and 2012, doing something, nobody cared. I couldn't fill a kitchen table of people who were interested. Nobody really was that concerned about it. At least in Washington State, there was some recognition that King County was corrupt, and that was why there was the nickname, right? The fraud factory, was the nickname for the King County Elections Department. But that was mainly because of the 2004 obvious scam of multiple counting until one person won, right? And then, of course, all counting stops at that point. So anyway, it's just the way it goes. Okay, here's another question. So we have to pay attention. We can't just let go of it. Being engaged, being involved. The other thing that I have seen, and I want to point this out multiple times just recently, there were several elections that were lost. There's a city council race I'm thinking of out in Ocean Shores where she lost by 1 vote. There's a couple more, and I could find 20 people in Ocean Shores who didn't vote because they said their vote didn't count. That was stupid, lazy, and they're the ones that handed that position to a terrible person in that city. Voting is not the only solution out there, but it is part of the process. And if you're not capable of doing more than voting, if that's the bare minimum civic engagement level you can attain, at least get it done, because not doing it there's no value in not doing it at all. There's none. So at least be engaged that much. I don't think it should be done in a way that this is all I'm going to do and that's my big civic engagement. It's just the minimum level, and being involved in other ways to influence and help other people vote, get their votes in, helping people actually run for office, researching corruption in your local government, because it's there. The only reason you don't know it is because you haven't looked. There's always something like this going on. Thoughts on trolling as a means of activism against the political figures. I've been having a lot of fun on Ferguson's Facebook page lately, and seems others have as well. Well, I mean, trolling is going to be something that's always gone on, right, for a long time. And I think just remember, keep it humorous and not nasty. And if you have some way of doing that, you know how to distinguish between it, I think it's fine. Everybody expects that. Listen, I get trolled all the time. Trolling, I don't care about that really, but for people who do, I think that probably matters, and it'll make an impact. Don't let it get out of control. I think you keep it within the lines of good debates, and you never know. Let's see. Here's a question. I'm trying to get to the question, guys, because I know we're running close on the time. So I'm going to try to hit these last questions as best I can here. Are there any actual, here's Mort CS. Are there any actual penalties for a politician that willfully violates their oath of office? No, not unless you're a Republican. Every Democrat in the state can violate their oath of office at will, with impunity, endlessly, and I've never seen once that being an acceptable use, even though it's in the statute, for a recall election, just as a way of measuring whether there's any penalties. So no, violating your oath of office, it's consistent behavior for a lot of the particularly Democrats. Some Republicans do as well, but it's not a good thing. I mean, your oath of office should mean something, but again, it all comes down to definition. And I've seen that excuse used to go after Republicans a few times who were doing good things, but because the left was angry about them, and sometimes the judges will go that way, and it's one of the issues. Jason, got a question here. On the Republican candidates for governor, will both I assume you mean candidates on the ballot, or will there only be one? Well, right now, there's 2 obvious candidates that are Republicans that are on the ballot. You have Reichert. So Dave Reichert's running, and he's probably got the largest fundraising campaign and marketing campaign going on out there. You also have Sammy Byrd, who got the endorsement of the Republican Party, which is also helping him. He's up to about $500,000 that he's raised. So those are the 2 Republican campaigns that are serious out there, and most likely one of them gets through. That's just how it probably works. There's 28 people on the ballot. There's other people that are running as Republicans, but I don't think they're running serious campaigns of any kind. So anyway, that's where we're at. So all things being equal, it'd be great if somebody other than Ferguson ends up on the ballot. Any human in Washington is superior to the abusive nature of Bob Ferguson. So anyway, that's my unvarnished opinion about that guy. Can you speak about the top 2 primary? Seems like both good and bad, assuming all voters can vote in this primary. Yeah, all voters can vote. You're going to see a bunch of them don't vote, which is foolish because the primary is more impactful than the general. So the top two primary has weaknesses, substantial weaknesses in it. Part of the freak out with Bob Ferguson last week was really related to all the drama related to the fact that the top two, last week, all the drama was related to the top two primary, and that everyone's thrown into this common element. And instead of having the more traditional approach where two or more parties, it could be as many parties as you want, decide to pick, they say, hey, this is our best guy and we'll move him forward. There's a whole process that they go through to get that done. Whether it's voting in a primary to pick their own party or their own candidate, or they have a convention or whatever they want to do, that's their path to get that candidate forward. And over time, you would have, in theory, the best candidates from their respective parties running against each other in the general. And so then the general is a winner-takes-all election. Now, the theory about the top two primary, and the reason why the Republicans were willing to compromise on this back in the day when it was created in our state, the jungle primary system, had more to do with the fact that the Republicans believed that, some Republicans believed that if you could eliminate the libertarian vote and some of these other fringer, little parties that didn't really have much support, if you could make it so that their candidates would never survive the primary, then they'd be more likely to shift into your camp. That was actually what the Republicans considered after Slade Gordon lost, and I want to say it was 2000, something like that, whatever that year was that Slade Gordon lost his reelection. And so that was kind of the theory, I think, that they were pushing for. And the Democrats had always wanted it because I believe they thought they could manipulate the final process that way, because they also had problems with the Green Party and other groups coming from their left. So anyway, that's one of the challenges with it. I don't think the top two primaries an optimal way of running an election, because of the games that you can play with filing all different kinds, 4 different Republicans or Democrats, and then people don't really get a choice. They get something like what we had in the 10th congressional district, or the lieutenant governor's race, or the Secretary of State's race, or the 47th ledge district race, where we got 2 people on the ballot who were horrible in every way because of the gamed system that got them there, and nobody really got any other choices. Jason, will gun control be a top priority for Sideshow Bob as governor, or will he be pushing other policies? Well, he'll push whatever he's told to push. Ferguson he's a dictatorish tyrant type person, but he's still controlled by cadres and cabals that push him, especially the special interests who plan on making money off of him. So he'll do whatever they tell him to do. And as long as he's continuing to get all the power that he can get, he's threatened by people. Bob Ferguson likes crime. He enjoys unleashing criminals into our communities. It's so funny that he's trying to run this campaign right now and pretend like he cares about crime. He doesn't. Everything he's done for 12 years in that office has been to make life less safe, unleashing violent sex predators out of McNeil Island, put them into your neighborhoods, and signing off on it, even against experts, to put them in your neighborhoods without any warning. These are the kind of problems that we have with him, plus early release of violent felons, all kinds of other things that he's done to make life less safe. Now, he wants you to not have the ability to defend yourself. And he's been going down this road relentlessly since Bloomberg and all those people decided to push it on him. And he's become the new poster child for destroying your freedoms and liberty. Bob Ferguson is also after your First Amendment because he's pushing the Ministry of Truth program under HB 1333. That was his signature bill. He was pushing it because somebody in D.C. told him he had to, so he's willing to do their bidding. So bad things will be his priority, whatever happens when he gets in there. Let's see, post office, all the more reason for folks to fight putting party. Yeah, Pat Caldwell's a good question. How do we get that off the envelope? Thanks. Okay, now this, just so you know, because I did a video on this a while ago, what you're referring to is the party affiliation that occurs only during the presidential partisan primary. That is the way we do these elections now. It's binding for the Democrats, not for the Republicans. And but when the Democrats wanted to do it, and essentially it's to the benefit of private political parties. So the Secretary of State doesn't even necessarily want to do it. It's just didn't want to do it originally. If I remember right, when Kim Wyman was there, she didn't want to do these partisan primary votes like this. Then, when that happened, then they wanted to have the ability to sort them into whoever's voting for which party. That's why they put them on the outside of the envelope. That's still a weak excuse for doing that, and they shouldn't, but that's why they do it. And so it's not a good thing. There's all kinds of problems related to that. And it's not a good thing. They can easily change it. It's not hard to change. They've just purposely done it, I think, just to make it, just to create drama for Republicans more than anything else. I love food right here. What do you think about Inslee taking away Washington citizens' right to certain small arms while supporting the war in Ukraine? That's testing much more effective weapons. Yeah, it's classic. I mean, listen, all these guys are hypocrites, right? They like weapons if they think they can have total control over it. What they don't want is your ability to defend yourself, because they always want you coming to government to ask them for help. Thunderstrike 303, what are some strategies to improve employee retention and motivation in the Postal Service, considering the unique challenges of working in a high-volume, customer-facing environment? Well, that is a great question. I feel like that's a Chat GPT question you're throwing at me. I mean, I think one of the things you could do is have better trained employees, number one, and probably ultimately you're gonna, when you're a customer-facing environment like this, where you are having to go out there and work, predictable types of work. If the post office is going to be a modern entity that we maintain, and it's not going to go away in the future, then you probably need to staff up on that level of stuff and not so much on people in the back end. One of the challenges that we've had, though, is that the post office appears starting to be weaponized politically internally, which is definitely a problem. And this, by the way, is not a new story. I remember there's a lot of stories that came out of the pre-Civil War South, where the abolitionist movement was trying to send flyers or letters and stuff into the South to influence them to get rid of slavery. And the legislators that existed in the South were trying to use the post office to censor those out and make sure they never got to their addresses. So there's been drama around the post office for political reasons for, a century and a half or longer. So anyway, that's what it is. Great, thank you. Always appreciate the heads up. Everyone should hit the like button. We're listening and waiting for the question to be answered. We need to support Glenn. So great. Thank you. Always appreciate it. You don't need to show gratitude, but it's just making, always appreciate whatever and however much you want to support the efforts here. What is it going to take to make Washington more purple? Well, one thing it's going to take is good Republican candidates pushing rational ideas and finding ways of getting that message out further into the community, into places too that you aren't reaching right now. And I do think that that's important. How are we going to have a fair election with mail-in voting? Mail-in voting is terrible. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it opens the door to all kinds of problems. What you have to do is do all the stupid things they allow you to do around mail-in voting, working towards the goal that we have to find ways of pushing back and, ballot harvesting, doing whatever we have to do, clean up the voter rolls, whatever we have to do in those margins to push it over. You can still win. You just need larger margins, which is ridiculous, but that's how it is right now. And I just think we just need to do some work there. Okay, guys, but that's it. I'm just going to, I have to close this because I'm getting short on time here. I hopefully will get my next Tales of Tyranny video out about Bob Ferguson this week. I'll launch my video that I was screwing up on my thumbnail here earlier today on I-2066. If you want to learn more, I've got a nice Venn diagram explanation using the UTC's logo on what's actually happening here. So you'll like that video, I think. And with that, I do hope that you can tune in for next week. I'll probably do another live stream then, of course. I'm assuming I'm still on that time frame. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Just remember, if you haven't already subscribed, you can go to my website. You can subscribe there. You can hit subscribe on the YouTube channel down below. You can hit like. You can share this video with others. Whatever we can do to get the word out that probably our government and certainly bureaucracy don't want you to hear, I think that's to the benefit. And we'll see how it goes. So I hope all's well. And thanks for all the questions. I couldn't get to all of them here today, but I tried to get to as many of them as I possibly could. Hope all's well. Talk to you later.